At approximately 1 a.m., Ricardo Diaz Zeferino, his brother Augustin de Jesus Reynoso, and their friends and co-workers Atiquio Esdo Mendez and Jose Amado Garcia finished their shift at a restaurant in Gardena. Around 2 a.m., Reynoso rode his bicycle across the street to a CVS store, but when he came back outside, he discovered that his bicycle was gone. A CVS security guard called 911 and reported suspected bicycle thieves. Importantly, the guard did not report that anyone had a weapon, threatened anyone, used force, or made physical contact with anyone. But according to the amended complaint, the police dispatcher mistakenly described a bicycle theft as a robbery, a much more serious crime that generally involves force or fear. That single mistake dramatically changed how officers viewed the situation. Mendez and Garcia began riding their own bicycles home along Redondo Beach Boulevard while also looking for Reynoso's stolen bicycle, with Ricardo Diaz Zeferino following behind on foot. Sergeant Christopher Cuff eventually stopped Mendez and Garcia as possible suspects. But according to the lawsuit, these were not the men who had stolen the bicycle. They were friends of its owner who were helping search for it. The complaint alleges that both men immediately followed the sergeant's commands, stopped near KO's restaurant, raised their visibly empty hands, and remained facing the officer. Their clothing also reportedly did not match the description given by dispatch. Mendez was wearing a white shirt with light-colored pants, while Garcia was wearing a red and black striped shirt with white pants. Sergeant Cuff called for backup, and officers Christopher Anthony Mendez, Christopher Andrew Sanderson, and Matthew Stephen Toada soon arrived. Ricardo approached the scene on foot and stopped between his two friends. According to the lawsuit, he was unarmed, raised his empty hands, and tried to explain that police had detained the wrong people. The three men were simply looking for the stolen bicycle. Despite this, the responding officers exited their vehicles and pointed their handguns at the men. The amended complaint says all three were visibly unarmed, and that officers Mendez and Toada acknowledged seeing that Ricardo was not holding anything in his hands. Dash camera footage captured the chaotic encounter, the officers shouting commands in both English and Spanish while Ricardo repeatedly raised and lowered his hands. At one point, an officer warned him, "You do it again, you're going to get shot." Ricardo eventually removed his baseball cap, and as his hands began moving upward again, the officers opened fire. The shooting was captured on multiple Gardena Police Department dash cameras, providing a clear record of the roughly 27 seconds leading up to the gunfire. Officers Mendez, Sanderson, and Toada fired a combined 13 rounds. Ricardo was struck repeatedly and collapsed in the street, with contemporary reports stating that he was hit 8 times. Mendez was also shot, with a bullet striking him in the back near his spine, while Garcia was not hit. According to the lawsuit, Ricardo remained alive on the pavement in severe pain and told his friends, "This is the end of me." Ricardo Diaz Zeferino ultimately died from his injuries. Officers later maintained that his repeated hand movements made them believe he might be reaching toward his waistband for a weapon. Prosecutors concluded that the officers could reasonably have believed they had lost sight of his hands and that he might be reaching for a weapon. But no weapon was found. Ricardo was unarmed, and so were Mendez and Garcia.
Well, at the time that he was killed, the only news outlet reported what the police said. And what the police said was that they suspected somebody of a burglary and that they suspected that my client was a burglar and that the person was not obeying police directions. And that was all they said. The inference is to the public that this was probably a criminal and he deserved to be killed. Whether that's true or not, as a civil rights attorney, we know that that's not the issue. Another really critical thing we see in the video, which is why these videos must be shown, is that the officers are standing with their guns pointed at my clients. 2 of the other gentlemen at no time moved their hands. They were always above their head, and yet one of them was shot in the back. So it was not an issue that they weren't paying attention or following police orders. And secondly, critical, the officers are standing directly in front of our clients. Every officer is trained on day 1 in the academy that you take coverage if you're in fear. If an officer is not in fear, then he'll stand in front of the person and, give them orders. The fact that they're standing in front of our clients really shows that these officers were not in fear of their life. Otherwise, they would have been behind their car vehicle and taken coverage. That's important because the spin on the story up to now was that my clients had posed a threat of harm to the officers and that the officers were afraid for their lives, which is when an officer can shoot. And clearly there are circumstances when an officer is afraid for his life. But in this video, we see there's no fear. And if they're saying they're afraid for their life, then clearly they're being extremely dishonest.
Gardena Police Chief Edward Madino later acknowledged the central facts surrounding the incident. Police had stopped the wrong people, and an unarmed man had been shot and killed. However, the chief maintained that the officers believed Ricardo's movement toward his waistband justified the use of deadly force. The officers' position remained that, during the tense encounter, they believed Ricardo's hands were no longer clearly visible and that he could have been reaching for a weapon. Even though the investigation found no gun at the scene, the department continued to defend the officers' perception of the threat. The incident therefore raised a difficult question. When police mistake a suspected bicycle theft for a robbery, stop people who may not match the description, and then open fire on an unarmed man, where does reasonable fear end and accountability begin?
He was not complying with his orders, and the officers could not see his hands at one point. The detailed analysis is in the district attorney's opinion letter. We understand this is a tragic incident, but this case has been litigated for a number of years, and those officers only had seconds to make a split-second decision.
Listening to Chief Medrano is really sad, because what he says is he continues spinning the facts. He says, at one point, we couldn't see his hands. However, when you look at the video, which is why it's critical to see these videos, you see that Mr. Zeferino's arms are clearly empty, that all three officers testified in depositions that they knew his hands, he didn't have a gun in his hand. One of them said, well, I didn't know if he didn't have a gun in one hand. So there's a spin of facts, and we just believe that it is critical for the public to know these were just three guys on their way home, had done nothing wrong, and my client was shot 8 times.
The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office ultimately declined to criminally charge officers Mendez, Sanderson, and Toada. Following the shooting, the 3 officers were temporarily placed on paid leave, but according to the amended complaint, they soon returned to full-time duty without disciplinary consequences. Chief Madino later confirmed that the department's internal review had concluded and that none of the 3 officers were disciplined. The chief did acknowledge that better police tactics could have been used, specifically criticizing the officers for leaving the protection of their patrol vehicles. The department later introduced additional training focused on de-escalation and tactical procedures. In December 2013, roughly 6 months after the shooting, Ricardo Diaz Zeferino's parents, Juan Jesus Diaz and Bonifacio Zeferino, along with his estate, Etiquio Esdo Mendez, and Jose Amado Garcia, pursued a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Gardena, the Gardena Police Department, Chief Madino, and the involved officers. The amended complaint alleged excessive force, unlawful detention and arrest, failure to supervise unconstitutional policies and practices, assault and battery, false arrest, false imprisonment, and negligence. Before the case reached trial, Gardena agreed to settle the claims for a combined $4.7 million. Garcia's claim was resolved first for approximately $200,000, while the remaining $4.5 million settlement covered Ricardo's family and Mendez. Ricardo's family received approximately $2.8 million, while Mendez received approximately $1.7 million. But even after the civil case was settled, another fight remained. The dash camera recordings were still sealed. The Los Angeles Times, Associated Press, and Bloomberg went to federal court seeking access to the footage, arguing that the public had a right to see recordings documenting a fatal police shooting that had resulted in a multi-million-dollar taxpayer-funded settlement. Gardena fought to keep the video sealed, even arguing that the city had agreed to the settlement while believing the footage would remain private. U.S. District Judge Stephen Wilson rejected that argument and concluded that Gardena's millions of dollars in settlement payments actually strengthened the public interest in seeing what happened. On July 14, 2015, after approximately 2 years out of public view, the dash camera recordings were finally released under Judge Wilson's order. For the first time, the public could watch the encounter and judge the events for themselves.
Gardena Police Chief Ed Medrano also said he disagrees with the judge's orders to release the police officer's dash cam video.
We don't want our community members to feel distrustful of us because they know at some point their situation may end up on video or on the internet.
The release of the footage sparked major public controversy and renewed calls for an outside investigation into the Gardena Police Department. The recordings gave viewers an opportunity to see the encounter that had previously been known largely through police reports, legal filings, and statements from officials. What made the footage especially significant was a short period immediately before the shooting. The 3 men were visible under police lights, Officers had their weapons drawn, commands were being shouted, and Ricardo's hands repeatedly moved as the confrontation escalated. The video quickly became central to the public debate over whether the officers' actions were justified and whether the department had done enough to hold them accountable. With criminal charges declined, internal discipline absent, and a multi-million-dollar civil settlement reached, the released footage became one of the few ways the public could independently examine what happened that night.
People can see the video, so the public can see everything.
Agustin Reynoso is Zeferino's brother. It was his bike that had been stolen. He stood before a federal courthouse in downtown LA today holding a photo of his brother.
Losing a human being is not going to be the same.
Reynoso was joined by his attorneys and Eutiquio Mendez, who was one of the three men in the video.
Pero la policía pues no lo escuchó.
Mendez was wounded in the shooting. He says a bullet fragment remains lodged near his spine and that he's traumatized for life. The attorneys for Mendez and Zeferino's family want federal investigators to launch a probe into the shooting, which occurred in June of 2013.
We have asked for an investigation into the civil rights violations by these officers, which we think merits a prosecution.
Justice isn't done until the police are held accountable.
The controversy eventually raised another question. Were the officers still on duty? The answer was yes. Reports indicated that the officers involved continued working, and they were also paid overtime when they participated in legal proceedings connected to the case. That detail became especially controversial after the city agreed to a settlement totaling approximately $4.7 million. The case therefore left behind a difficult question about accountability. If officers remain on duty after a fatal shooting, receive no internal discipline, and the city later pays millions to settle the resulting civil claims, what consequences actually follow? The Gardena case became a powerful example of how a mistaken dispatch description, a rapidly escalating police encounter, and questions about the use of deadly force can continue to affect families, communities, and taxpayers long after the shooting itself is over.
So are these officers still on duty?
All officers have always been on duty, and every time they participated in any legal proceeding, they were paid time and a half.
Even though the city has settled for $4.6 million.
They were given 2 weeks, what we call a vacation to the beach, and then they were back on duty, always on full pay.